Okay, so we're ready to start with understanding art history. So, online students, you guys can either just be listening to this lecture and looking at slides or just watch. I know the quality of the camera is not great. Like I told these guys yesterday, it puts 10 pounds and 10 years on me. So you can just imagine what it does to art history, art. So, understanding art history, we're also going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the snapshots, because I'm going to go ahead and assign those to you guys today. You each are going to get just one, because we're starting out on prehistory and there aren't that many images. You may end up with two. What I do is you turn those in, and then I go ahead and copy and paste them into one big document and post it so that you guys can go ahead and use that to study. So I want us to get understanding art history as well as the form, function, content, and context kind of banged out today, hopefully, and maybe some vocabulary. So let's go ahead and begin with this. We already talked a little bit about this yesterday, about the differences between subjective and objective, so I don't know if we need to reiterate it. But just know that sometimes people are going to have very subjective opinions about artwork. In particular, journals that have been placed upside down and entered into shows, which I find, yeah, that's my personal opinion. And then objective is all the things you need to know about the painting. Who was the artist? You know, what country did it come from? What was its use? Who was the audience? All of those things are really important. Okay, so we're looking at the historical content of artwork. And both history and art history kind of need each other. Those disciplines go hand in hand. A lot of people like art history so much that they become an art historian. And that gives them an opportunity to be like a curator at a museum. If you're really artistically inclined, you can become an art restorer. And, you know, if you're really good at it, you can become a forger, because there's lots of forgeries out there that nobody really acknowledges. Historical documents will shed light on art and architecture, as well as the artists, the builders, the patrons, the audience, and society. So obviously, we don't have historical documents for prehistory. And so that's why we don't know that much about it. You know, Stonehenge, all we know about Stonehenge are more or less the objective things. You know, you can be subjective and make conjectures, but for sure we don't know. So perceptions of what art is do change, and terminology helps us understand historical analysis. So we will always be looking at vocabulary, and so it's always a good idea when I give you a vocabulary sheet that you fill in the definition when we talk about it, as well as put it in a notebook of some sort to help you study. So moving right along here, I may have started. So here's a good example of a historical context. It would be the Vietnam Memorial. Have any of you visited this memorial? Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I was in high school when the Vietnam War ended, and I remember the whole mess that it was. You know, soldiers were drafted. You didn't have a choice. My brother was very lucky because he was older than me. He had a number that was in the 300s. So he didn't get drafted and he didn't have to go. A lot of people went to college to avoid getting drafted. But if you were drafted, you went. It was not a choice. And what was really sad is that when they would return home, they were not welcomed due to the unpopular attitude towards this war. And so, you know, soldiers would get off the plane, and normally we now can see that, you know, if anybody comes home from Afghanistan or anything, you know, the cameras are there, the families are there. It's, you know, a big event. You know, my nephew was in the Navy, and, you know, when they see his military ID card, they say, thank you for your service. That attitude was not happening during the Vietnam War. And so when they got ready to do a Vietnam memorial, a young, she's like maybe a sophomore or a junior at Yale in the architecture department, won the contest for the memorial. And the memorial is basically this gouge in the earth with this black granite with the names of each person who died etched into it. Initially, people were really upset about it. But then when people started visiting it and they could find their loved one's name, and they do rubbings of it and take pictures of themselves with it, it became a very healing thing. But the historical context of this memorial, which we will be studying, is that initially it was not accepted. It was not liked. Part of it was that she was an Asian girl, and there was a lot of hostility towards Asians during that time because of what had happened in Vietnam. There were lots of protests against the war. So it's good to have a grasp on the historical context of something. Another context, those of you who've already taken world studies probably know about the 100-Year War. When Calais, a French port on the English Channel, was under siege. And these were the burghers or the town elders, and there was a deal made that they would drop, they would back off from the siege if the burghers of Calais would come and let themselves be killed. And so Jourdan, in 1889, went ahead and did this very, very moving statue of the burghers, and they're looking afraid, they're looking scared, they're looking ragged, they have not had much to eat, they've been under siege, and it's very moving. However, the patrons didn't like it because it didn't look heroic enough, even though this was pretty, accurate to what those guys probably, felt. The good news is they did not lose their lives. But this kind of shows you how the context of this, it's actually got two contexts. One is, the 100-Year War, but it's also what somebody in 1889 would think, and they would want these people to look heroic. So there can be multiple layers of historical context. So we're going to look a lot more at form, function, content, and context. The object's shape and or structure and materials used. Function is the artist's intent and actual function, whether it's ceremonial or decorative. Content includes the subject matter, what is depicted, and whether it's a narrative, whether it's symbolic, whether it's spiritual or religious, where it's historical, mythological, supernatural, or propagandist. It also could be satirical, and it could be protest-oriented. Context, religious, political, cultural forces that influence the making of the artwork. So those are all what you're going to be building your snapshots using form, function, content, and context. So if you know all of those for each piece of artwork, you're going to just do amazingly well. Okay, so first we need to understand something called chronology. So the time frame and the dating of things. So back in the old days, we had BC, which basically, and then AD. Both of those were hooked onto the birth of Christ, because the calendar that we use was done back in the Middle Ages and set up by the church. So what happens is that, people have gotten away from things and are more secular, and they really don't want to reference, the life and death of a certain, religious person. And so rather than just figuring it out completely, they just change the name. So it can still be confusing. So for our purposes, BCE, before Common Era, and it counts down from a larger number to a smaller number. So our prehistorical artwork, 15,000 down to 12,000 BCE is going to be common. So you've got basically, if you were to look on this in a linear way, BCE is counting down, and Common Era is counting up, so to speak. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's important to understand that, because when we start talking about classical Greece, it is, 400 BCE. So make sure you understand the difference between BCE and CE. Okay, so here's an example of going ahead and looking at form, function, content, and context. I'm going to get somebody else to read this because I'm running out of voice. So go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Form is alone canvas. Function is painting. Content is depiction of the effects of the morning light on the bottom front of the train station as well as the state. Context. The Industrial Revolution brought mobility to the masses. Manufacturing provided ready-made paint tubes, research in optics and color, allowing the impressionists to travel to paint outdoors. Their motivation was to better understand the present everyday life.
Okay, so we've got a lot packed into a few sentences here, but it tells you quite a bit about this painting. You know, it was done by Claude Monet. It's the Saint Lazare station. It was done in 1877 CE, which means it was done, you know, not too long ago compared to some stuff. So its form is an oil on canvas, and its function is a painting. It could be decorative, for example. Content. The Impressionists were very interested in depicting light. That was their foremost reason for painting. And they also wanted to capture everyday life. They were coming out of the neoclassicism where people like David and Ingres, which we will study, had these amazing, huge paintings that depicted all sorts of glorious battles and various things in either mythology or in history. And so to have artists just running around painting what they saw, gosh, who would do that? So, and then the context is that with the Industrial Revolution, the steam railway was formed. All of a sudden, you could have suburbs to a city. You could travel a lot of places, and that made it a lot more available to the masses. Having ready-made paints and tubes was an amazing thing because prior to that, if you were an artist, you ground your own pigment into the oils and did whatever you had to do to make the thing. With the research in optics and color, the Impressionists were able to travel and paint outdoors and depict what light does to everyday scenes. So there you've got a lot of information and a whole lot of words. Okay, so we need to understand what medium is being used. We need to know about dated written documents. You guys should already know what a primary and a secondary source is. Just to review, what is it? Let's go ahead and get one of the gentlemen. Here's my seating chart. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll reward you by asking you what a primary source is.
If I remember right, like a primary is just like a straight like fact out of like a document or
It would be an eyewitness account.
yeah,
So
eyewitness account or like just a historical document that was
that I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. So a secondary source would be
like learning it from someone else.
Mhm.
Someone else who saw it.
okay. So and that's really important. We don't really go into the provenance of artwork because these are all well known and curators do that, so we don't have to worry about it. So then we've got internal evidence. So fashion, clothing, furnishings also help us date things. Stylistic evidence. And now, of course, we have scientific evidence where we can go ahead and x-ray. Not we, but scientists can x-ray documents, can x-ray paintings, and find out more about them. They can test the paint, they can test the canvas, they can test the stretcher boards on the piece to help date it and see whether or not it really is a Leonardo da Vinci or something else. So then we're also looking at period style. So we've got different stages of Greek art, archaic, then we'll have classical, and then we'll have, oh gosh, I can't remember. I guess I'll have to look that up. Anyways, regional style. So two works from the same area are more likely to be similar than two pieces from the same time period, but different locations. So Egyptian art versus Mexican, they're not going to look much alike. I mean, yes, they both built pyramids, but different kinds of pyramids. And then we have individual style, which we won't see much of until we start getting into the Renaissance. That was the first time artists actually started signing their work, and you started attributing pieces to real life, honest goodness people. And some people's style changes. Picasso had a blue period, and then he moved into Cubism. All of these we will study. So, okay. So we also need to think about genre. So we've got here a still life. It means it's inanimate objects or dead, animals. Then we have portraits. We've got landscapes. We've got religious. This is the Guadalupe, blanking on her. And then the historical, and then the mythological, which is Venus being born. It's not Madonna. It's something else.
It's Mary.
Yeah, it is Mary, but it's probably the most valuable relic, religious relic in Mexico, and why I can't think of it. It's not Madonna. I'll think of it.
Guadalupe.
Yeah, but it is Guadalupe.
Virgin de Guadalupe.
The what?
Virgin de Guadalupe.
Thank you. See, I don't know everything, so I go to people who do. Okay, iconography. Icon means some sort of image, and it's the writing of images, and most of the time iconography is symbolic. This is from a book of the dead in Egypt that was put in this gentleman's tomb, basically showing the steps that you go through when you die, where you get to the point where your heart is put on a balance with a feather, and if it is heavier than the feather, then you don't live, for the afterlife. This is an early etching or woodcut, actually, that was done depicting the theological differences between the Catholic Church and Martin Luther. These are both items we will be studying. So you can see that symbols and that sort of thing is very important. And then personification. So a human representing an idea. So this Nike of samurai race, it's a late Greek, Hellenistic Greek statue. So it's a mythological figure, and then this is liberty leading the people. This is post-French Revolution, but this is not an actual person. It is a mythological person, but it's been given a persona or personification, and so that's a part of art as well. And then attribution. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, the act of attributing. So there is going to be an essay question where they show you a picture of something called the Temple of Heaven. It's this round cylinder-like building that is obviously from China, and it looks a lot like the Forbidden City. You'll see that picture, and they'll ask you to say, what period did this come from based on your knowledge of a similar work that's in our required list. So then you'll have to go ahead and describe the item that's on our required list and attribute the piece that they're showing you to that same time period. You don't do much with provenance, the ownership of something, but it's good to at least know that should you ever find a Van Gogh at a garage sale, that you try and find as much provenance paperwork as possible showing who owned it, so that you can trace it back to perhaps, an original transaction between Van Gogh's sister-in-law and the piece. And then there's going to be schools. We've got the Dutch school. We have the Hudson River School. Those are groups of artists that are linked by style, time period, or geographic. Then patronage. He who has the gold makes the rules. That's probably a rule your parents have told you more than once. It also applies to artwork. They were often clergies, they were monarchs, they were popes, and they were the ones that decided the size, the subject matter, materials, and themes. Audience, very important to understand this. That image that we saw from the Book of the Dead, if they were to ask you who the audience was for that, it would be nobody, because once the guy is sealed up in the tomb, nobody's going to see it. And that's going to be kind of a tricky question. So understand who the audience is. The audience sometimes is the same as your patron, but more often the patron, builds it or pays for it to be built. And then, for example, Gothic stained glass windows with religious stories for the illiterate population, because in the Middle Ages, most everybody could not read. And then foreshortening, when we describe how something is painted or drawn. This is not one of our examples, but it's a very good example of something called foreshortening. If you were looking at this guy laying there, you would see it from that angle where it's been shortened as it goes back. Just like if you were drawing my hand and I was pointing a finger at you, you would be drawing this finger in a foreshortened manner. So, you know, you can see here, seen from the Rose Mountains grading foreshortened. So it's the premature or dramatically shortening or reducing in the time or the scale visually. Okay, so there's two types of sculpture that we need to know about. Subtractive, it means you're carving it away. There's a mythical story of Michelangelo rolling a big chunk of marble down a hill. Obviously, you can't really do that. Those things are too heavy. But as he's moving it, whether it's on a carriage or whatever, they ask him, you know, what are you doing with that piece of marble? And he said, there's an angel trapped inside and I need to get it out. So a lot of artists look at it that way, where they're just trying to, you know, chunk away the excess material to get the marble. So that's subtractive. Additive is when you're sculpting with clay and you keep adding clay. If any of you have taken ceramics, you add clay to make the image work, and then you can actually make a cast of it, and then molten metal is poured into the mold. And then you can have freestanding, which means that you can view it from all sides. Most Egyptian sculpture you cannot view from all sides. It's only three-sided. Sphinx being an important exception. And then a relief is a pattern or a scene that projects from a flat base. And we'll see plenty of that. And then architecture, really important. A lot of the pieces that you're going to have to know about, sometimes you'll get a question saying, what is this a footprint of? You're going to have to know it. Section is a vertical cutaway, and then another elevation drawing is showing one side of the building. This will be posted on Classroom, so at any time you need to look at some of these definitions, you will have them. So we kind of have looked at all of these. The architecture, the lateral section, which is cut away. Longitudinal would be where it's cut on a vertical plane going through the longest length of the piece. And don't get too worked up because we will be going over these again. You will not be tested on these definitions yet. Another important thing is the hypostyle. It's having a roof supported by pillars, typically in several rows. We've got a really good example here with the temple at Karnak. This is Egyptian. And then this is from the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which is in Spain. The Moors originally built it. You can see that the pillars, when you have a hallway or a room that has lots of pillars supporting the roof, it is considered a hypostyle. And then flying buttresses, very important for any kind of Gothic style, mostly done for churches. And it was the ability to go ahead and build these braces outside the sanctuary that took the weight of the roof and the walls so that they could have the large stained glass windows. So there's a reason why things develop. And that's it on that. So, any questions? Are you guys overwhelmed yet? Well, no need to be overwhelmed. Like I said, by the time we get done with this class, you're going to know this content backwards and forward. And it's going to be fun. So we're going to delve a little bit more into form, function, content, and context because you guys are going to get your snapshot assignments today. So this is the core of what you have to know. Form, the function, the content, and the context. And you saw how when we looked at that one painting of Monet's of Saint-Lazare train station, that a lot of information can be learned and written down about something when we use these four things, the FFCC, as it were. So, first of all, art is all around us. And when we analyze it, we learn about its history and the civilization and artists who made it. And we use form, function, content, context so that we're able to reflect, understand, and respond to what we see. Once you understand this, you can travel all over Europe, all over the world, look at artwork and just be thrilled. So form is what it's made of. So, for example, the pieces that you're going to be doing snapshots on for today are going to be mainly made out of some sort of stone or ceramic or clay or bone. And then we're going to also talk about the application of the design elements, but we'll probably talk about those tomorrow. But the design elements include things like shape, color, size, decoration, texture, balance, repetition, dominance, harmony, unity, and contrast. And so form always includes some sort of reference to those elements and principles. So here we've got Falling Water, Frank Lloyd Wright. It was built between 1936 and 1939. Reinforced concrete, sandstone, steel, and glass. It's located in Bear Run, Pennsylvania. So the form of this, when you think about the dates, so this is just on the edges of the Depression. And the man who commissioned this owned a department store. Frank Lloyd Wright was starving to death. This guy said, I want you to build me a vacation home. And the site was by this river. And most every other architect would have said, okay, let's position the house so that you have a really nice big picture window looking at the waterfall. Nope. Frank Lloyd Wright did something completely different. He built it over the waterfall. And the forms and things that he used makes it incredible. I would like to go visit it. It is a museum and you can go see it.
So no one lives in it?
What? Nobody lives in it at this time now. It's now a museum. And they've had to reinforce these things that have been cantilevered out over the waterfall because the concrete was starting to sag. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright didn't even want to reinforce the concrete, so it's a good thing that the owner did, or this might not exist.
So like someone like built it as a home and then they like passed away and then they made it to a museum?
Mm-hmm. But it was originally a private home. So you can understand why the form on this, we would want to go ahead and say that it is a building and it's made out of reinforced concrete, sandstone, steel, and glass. It has, to me, very linear shape, very unusual shape. So any of the words that give you, shape or style, that sort of thing. So here's an example of the interior. The couch along the window seat was made out of cement, and then they put the cushions on top of it. You can see that the rock work, you can see it from the inside and out, and some amazing windows so that they've got beautiful views of the woods. But in order to see the waterfall, they do have to go outside. Okay, so, let's look at this. What visual, physical elements describe this building? All right, let's get somebody to say. I gave you an example already, but let's stone. Okay, stone, it's a good one. What else?
And like the section of the river.
Okay.
It's like a three-dimensional like rectangle.
Yeah, so it has a very rectangular, linear form. Yes.
I was gonna say it's like really boxy.
It is very boxy, but those boxes are really skinny, and the idea that it cantilevers or, without any visible support goes over that.
Yeah, it's not
water.
just like one.
Yeah. And we just talked about some of the things that differentiate it from other architectural structures. It does not have a pitched roof. It doesn't have shingles anywhere to be found. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost made to look impossible, like
Mhm.
where like that block shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back then that modern design, that was new.
That was very new. Very new. Yes.
And also like the interior, all the furniture is built into the home, so it's like functional.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, so we're not going to do the discussions today because we're trying to blow through this. Okay, so function becomes the artist's intended use of the work. What is the intended use of this?
Oh,
Yeah, it's a home. And so the changes that might occur due to the context of the audience, time, location, and culture. Somebody already mentioned it. It's very typical of the modern architectural movement, where you're using very boxy linear lines, you're using big windows. And then when you get into the postmodern, architecture changes again. So, and it's used for, obviously, to live in. There is some decoration, but it's pretty functional, so it's not totally decorative. It's not commemorating anything, and it was made for personal expression as opposed to a spiritual, social, or political one. So function. So we've got here what's called the Bayou Tapestry. This is the cavalry scene, and the banquet scene. This is embroidery on linen, so it's not a true tapestry. It's actually in Bayou, France. And you can see by those dates, definitely Middle Ages, medieval times. So its function, let's get somebody to read this because I'm running out of steam here. You want to read it?
Yeah. It commemorates the story of William's conquest of England at the Battle of Hastings, commissioned by William's half-brother Bishop Odo to commemorate the conquest. The tapestry is 230 feet long, contained images and Latin commentary in narrative form, which aided the illiterate population in understanding the sequence of events. Ironically, this was the final and best-known work of Anglo-Saxon art. It tells a Norman story. It's political propaganda to the conquered Anglo-Saxons.
Okay, so that gives us a clear idea of what the function was. It was made to convince those, Saxons, how mighty, William the Conqueror was. So, the content has the subject matter, visible imagery, whether it's representational or non-objective or symbolic, and interactive, communicates elements of design and represents and presents, a story, often a narrative. And like I said, maybe a narrative or symbolic. Could be propagandist, could be satirical or a protest. So here's another example of content. It's another one of our works. It's Tamati Waka Nene, and it was a painting done by Godfrey Lindair from 1890. It's oil on canvas, and it's in New Zealand. The paradox in this painting is that this was a Maori chief, and this is his tattoo work. That was his mana, that was his power. And there were various other elements in this painting that shows his position in the Maori society. So this is a good one to think about. What are some ways that you can communicate your identity to others with nonverbal? For me, this would be the best one. If I think of myself as anything, I am a painter. I am not a draftsman. I don't draw. I paint. I use color. I use brushes, or I use other things. So think about that. What would be one or two things that you could say? Let's go ahead and just pick on one or two of you. Let's go ahead and see here. Mark.
You could use like a basketball or something.
Okay, so a basketball, and unfortunately your symbol for who you are is somewhat deterred because of that.
You could also use a cast.
The cast for right now. Ladies, any of you want to volunteer what might be a symbol? Makeup or clothing is a huge one. Yeah, I love clothes. I live in a small house. I have very tiny closets. I have to rotate my clothing in and out depending on the season. I have way too many shoes. That's okay. I'm a woman. Okay, so the content was the portrait of a Maori chieftain. The details that showed his rank was the elaborate tattooing, the staff with the eye in the center, the feathers tied to the staff. However, it was painted by a New Zealand painter who was actually European, in the European style, using things like atmospheric perspective, and it was painted with oil paints. None of these things really, they're depicting things that show him as he is, but the sort of the tension on it is that he's painted with a European style rather than a Maori style. So that's content. Context. This is where we get to the heart of things. Who was the artist? Who was the patron? Who was the audience? How does the work reflect the cultural aspects of a particular time and place? Whether it be religion, political ideas, concepts of ideal beauty, which we'll see a lot in classical Greece, gender attitudes. Boy, we really start seeing that when you get into 20th and 21st century art. Those are all the, and then the context for its use and what impact did this artwork have on the history of art. So, for example, Pablo Picasso going ahead and experimenting with Cubism. He was very much influenced by African art that came in during that time because Europe was making a power grab for Africa, and so there were lots of colonies down there. And because of the African art coming into Europe during the 1800s, it influenced Picasso, who, with his take on that, very much influenced modern art. So here we've got something that comes from Canada, late 19th century, wood, paint, and string. You can see that it's a transformation mask. When it's closed, it looks like this. And when it's open, it looks like that. And there are special little strings that the wearer can pull to make those open and shut. And so the context on this, what do you think it could be? Yeah.
Like spiritual.
Spiritual, yeah, definitely part of that. And what do you think the transformation idea is? Well, change. You're basically looking at somebody coming out dancing with this mask on, and you're seeing some sort of raptor bird, you know, the big beak. And then at some point in the ceremony, he pulls the string, and it becomes what? Maybe an ancestor, maybe a god. Don't know. But the context on this is very important. And so let's go ahead and look at this. Somebody to read this for me. Let's go ahead and have you read this one.
Masks worn by Native people of the Pacific Northwest, part of a complete ritual costume. Ancestral entities and supernatural forces temporarily embodied the actors wearing masks and other ceremonial costumes. Worn during a potlatch, a ceremony where the host displayed his status in part by giving away gifts to those in attendance. Animal transformation masks contain crests for a given man or family. Masks convey social position. Only those with good status can wear them, and also helps portray family genealogy by displaying family crests. Masks can represent transformational characters and myths.
Okay, what is interesting about this is that we're going to be studying the Pacific, Oceania, Indigenous Americas, and Africa at the same time, because there are a lot of similarities to, quote, primitive art that makes it important to study them together. But this to me is an amazing piece of art. And it's primitive art. Myths relate moments of transformation, often involving trickster supernatural, so there's lots of those. It's a god, goddess, or spirit, man, woman, or anthropomorphic animal who exhibits a great deal of intellect or secret knowledge and uses it to play tricks or otherwise disobey normal rules and conventional behavior. So that is the last one. Slide for this. Somebody wants to hit the lights for me. We're going to talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing today. I accidentally had them print out the wrong thing of list of artwork that we need to know, so I'll have to go ahead and give it to you. But this is a sample, and I'm going to go ahead and post this on Classroom so you can see it. This was done for the content area of Global Contemporary, and it's called The Gates. And it was a temporary exhibit that took place in New York City, in Central Park. So it has got form, function, content, and context on it. So it has, you know, the basics about this so that anybody, when you're doing this, the first year I made everybody do their own snapshots, 250 of these. It was too much work. It was busy work. You guys didn't need it. So we switched in mid-semester, and then we went ahead and switched to, you know, you guys doing, usually some people end up doing 3 snapshots per unit, but it's a lot less work, but it still gives you, you know, the concise information you need to study these. The thing to keep in mind is that you're doing this for your classmates, so you want to make sure it includes everything. So this individual, Ethan Scott, if any of you knew him, I'll just read this to you. Form. The gates was an installation of 7,500 orange gates around New York Central Park. Each gate had a rectangular frame which supported a saffron or orange piece of vinyl. The gates ran over 23 miles of walkways in the park, and each gate was about 16 feet high. The widths varied according to the pathway they were on. The pathways are complex, and they went through the entire park, and the installation is an example of an earthwork. So that was the form that he decided needed. Function. Artists, Christo and Jean-Claude, financed the project themselves, $21 million. And they didn't want to accept any form of sponsorship or patronage. That information actually could go under context, but, you know, they sold drawings to fund the project. It was exhibited for just 2 weeks, and the content, bright orange gates contrasting with the natural park around them. The artists complicated an environment that was, in fact, entirely invented in the mid-19th century to express the Victorian ideal of pastoral and picturesque landscape. So then the context. Some critics did not like the gates, as they believed they only drew attention to themselves while failing to truly complement the environment around them. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this student did. The other thing is you need to cite at least 3 examples. So Khan Academy can be one of them. Your Barron's book can be another one. And then you need to find the 3rd one. That should be fairly easy, because when you go into Khan Academy, you will see that for every image that you're studying, they give you a video, a lot of times, or an essay, or both. And then they give you additional sources. So, you know, like any term paper or any other paper that you would do in any of your classes, you need to go ahead and give me the citation in correct form. I'm not exactly sure what that is, whether it's APA or, you guys remember what high school do you usually use for English for citing sources?
Oh, MLA?
Yeah, MLA.
Okay, so it'll be MLA. So very easy to go online and make sure you have the MLA, and I'll go ahead and post that as well so you know which one. And this is just good training, because all of you are probably going to college. You need to know how to cite work. So you'll lose points on your snapshot for not including your sources. So I'll go ahead and put a template up on Classroom today, and you can go ahead and make a copy of it, then fill it in, and then you'll go ahead and turn it in through Classroom. And I'd like it done by Friday. Does that sound reasonable?
On Friday, we have that with the flashcards.
And then flashcards. Yeah. So that should give you plenty of time. I don't think I have any other homework for you guys at this point in time. Now take a look at here. Oh, I do have some homework for you, and it should help you with your studying. I just have to find it. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the camera. So we'll talk to the online students later to make you guys feel loved online. All right, everybody wave goodbye to them.
Bye.
Wave your hands. This is the way the camera. There we go. Excellent. All right. See you guys later.